Hello and welcome to our podcast, Two Chairs Talking. My name is David Grigg and I'm one of the chairs. I'm here with the other chair, my good friend Perry Middlemiss. So are you sitting comfortably there, Perry?
I am sitting very comfortably on a chair. Thank you, David. Yes.
Jolly good.
Good to talk to you again after 3 weeks and the listener. I hope they, let us not be presumptive about who they might be. I hope they are sitting comfortably and listening as well. Or maybe even walking down the street. And
well, that's a good way to listen to a podcast, yes.
As long as they're concentrating on what they're doing. I'm seeing far too many people out there on the street, David, who are walking around with their phones to their ears and actually not looking in the direction of where the traffic's coming.
Very
I'm finding this being a very much more common occurrence. So I'm having to brake to stop from killing people. And my wife is saying, sooner or later, you're going to run somebody down. And I say, well, I'm not going to try to, but it really isn't my fault. And she doesn't like it much because she actually ran into somebody who was on the phone.
Oh, gosh.
And that wasn't too good. That was a few years back. And she found the whole thing very traumatic, as you can...
It would be very traumatic.
As you can understand. Especially seeing as she was on the way to work at 8:30 in the morning and the police gave her not only a drink driving test, but a drug test as well.
Oh, good heavens.
And she was, of course, stone cold sober, but it was a bit traumatic. And poor guy broke both arms.
Goodness.
Well, he just ran across the road. He was running to the train station, not looking where he was going, ran across the road. She wasn't going very quickly. Bang, straight into it. Yeah. Well, this is a cheery subject for leading up to the festive season, isn't it?
Never mind.
Anyway, we just get carried away. But otherwise, everything's all right. You're doing well? Are you?
That's all right. I'm doing well. I'm fine. I'm rehearsing in a choir to sing Christmas carols at the end of the week. So
okay, that sounds pretty good.
That'll be fun. Just the local, carols by candlelight sort of thing, but it's fun.
Well, I'm sort of practising to sing in my choir as well, but it's a drinking choir, so we just sit down and drink. They're having a final get-together before Christmas, but I hope your choir goes well and you sing lots of carols. It's been a while since you've been
sung in the choir. 6 years, six years since I was in the Star Chorale, which was my previous choir, but things happened and it's a fair way from home and so on. But this one's just around the corner. It's just at the Whittlesea, Civic Centre. So.
Oh, okay. Well, that sounds good.
Yeah.
A lot of fun. Yeah, a lot of fun. Good night out, and you can have a bit of just let it be. It's a very cathartic experience, I think, singing in a choir. Yeah. You can really let rip, and as long as you don't go too ape, and then the conductor suddenly sort of picks you out with a steely look at the finger straight down.
If you're not singing in key, then yes,
you're in deep trouble.
A bit of a glare.
Yes, they can hear it, and anyway, I haven't had that pleasure of being in a choir. I'm not sure I've got the voice for it, but there we go. That's the way of it.
Well, let's keep on going with our voices then.
Shall we?
Do you have any news?
Only the Goodreads Readers Poll winners have been announced, David. So that's about all, really. I mean, there's been a few odd things here and there, maybe, but no other major awards. But
there's been a lot of best of the year sort of things from the New York Times and New Yorker and the Guardian and whoever, but it's interesting to see where they overlap and where they don't overlap. But that's
it is.
Do you want us to go through the list of? I thought we might just pick out just a few of the Goodreads Choice Awards.
Do you want to go through them?
Yeah. So the fiction category was won by Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, who is the author of Babel, which I raved about earlier this year. And this is a non-fantasy. It's very much a set in the real world thing to do with the business of publishing, the publishing business. So that's I'm looking forward to reading that, but I haven't yet got that.
I have a copy of that, but I haven't got to it yet.
We'll get to it. Mystery and thriller went to The Housemaid's Secret by Frida McFadden. Know nothing about that. Apparently it's a sequel to something called The Housemaid, so I don't know. Fantasy went to Hellbent by Lee Bardugo. Don't know anything about that one. Do you?
No, I don't know, but I know that Lee Bardugo's been around and written a fair bit. My daughter's a bit of a fan, so...
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Science fiction, the award went to In the Lives of the Puppets by T.J. Klune. Again, I haven't had anything to do with that. Something to do with Pinocchio or androids. I don't know. Anyway, never mind. Here's one you will be aware of. Holly by Stephen King took out the horror category.
I've got a copy of this, and I wonder a bit. I wonder a bit whether some of these awards just throw Stephen King into horror because that's what he's written all the way through. But the bulk of the one, this is one of the Holly Gibbons novels, the Mr. Mercedes trilogy and The Outsider. They got some supernatural and sort of horrific things about them, but some of the Mr. Mercedes was more...
that was
crime.
Strictly crime, yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
Odd. Anyway, I look forward to reading that one as well.
Yeah.
I'll get to that one.
Yeah. History and biography went to The Wager by David Grann, which I raved about earlier this year, about the shipwrecked crew of a British naval ship. And historical fiction, I added this one because the book there I thought I'd like to read is called Wayward by Amelia Hart, and that also won the best debut novel in the Goodreads choice. So, yeah, interesting looking stuff.
All right, okay. People can find the full list on the Goodreads site. We've spoken about that site before because that's where we track our reading and put up our reviews.
Yeah,
I do. I'm not sure whether you do, but put the reviews up there after I've published them elsewhere, and then about a month or so later, I'll copy them up there.
Yeah,
keeps track of everything and from what I'm doing, and I can just make a to be read list, which is
slide you by the minute. Yeah. Yes.
Well,
I'll put a link in the show notes to that, so it's fine.
Okay, all right.
Okay,
cool.
So let's roll on to what we've been reading.
Right,
do you want to kick off, Perry?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been on a bit of a crime reading spree of late, and I've just continued, not fully, but I've just continued over the last month or so. And as you'll know, David, over the last couple of years, I've been reading the Arthur Upfield Inspector Boney novels, Inspector Napoleon Bonaparte. These are Inspector Napoleon Bonaparte is a mixed race Indigenous Australian detective from who's working for the Queensland Police Force. He is... he's very intelligent and very good at his job, but he likes detecting. He doesn't actually like arresting people. As he says at one point in this particular novel, Winds of Evil, which is number 5 in the series, and this dates from 1937. So his idea is that he likes it as an intellectual exercise. He doesn't like the actual thought that the person that he is actually going to have arrested is going to be put in jail, or at that time possibly face the hangman's noose. So he's everywhere he goes, and in every situation that he's in, Arthur Upfield makes sure that he's the smartest guy in the room. And yes, he is. He very definitely knows pretty much all that he needs to about how to do the detecting. It's just a matter of can he find the clues or can he not. Now, as I said, this is number 5. The previous 4 I've enjoyed a lot. This one, not so much, and I'll explain why. Now, I don't know whether you're aware, David, that US crime writer Elmore Leonard at one stage, sometime in the 90s, I think, set down his 10 rules for good writing. The first of them was never open a book with weather. Never mention what the weather is like. Well, Arthur Upfield here does just that. In fact, he goes on for page after page after page about the weather. And he's talking... The book's set in outback New South Wales, near the borders of South Australia, New South Wales and Queensland. So north of Burke, south of the Queensland border. So you're right out in the outback. And from time to time out there, they get these massive windstorms that blow up huge amounts of sand. So you get a basically wind and sandstorm all over the place. And Upfield here just goes on and on and on about these particular winds and sand that's blowing around all over the place, the impact that it has on the communities and the people that are there. And he goes on with it so much you actually think that, oh, okay, he's really setting something up here. He's got to be doing something in particular, wholly and solely with this this type of weather pattern. And as it turns out, that's exactly what he's doing. Now, these whole high winds and the impact it has on people is going to play a major role in the reason why 2 people in around this outback station have been murdered, and another almost, she was strangled, but the act must have been disturbed by somebody at the time, and she was found half strangled and is now in hospital somewhere nearby. But 2 people over the previous couple of years have been found dead. Now, police don't really like this terribly much, as you can understand.
Sure.
2 murders and 1 attempted murder in a very small area. And nobody seems to know what's going on. The police around the place are sort of completely bamboozled and have got no idea. And, of course, the police commissioner requests that Boney step in. Now, he's in the Queensland Police Force, but he wanders around pretty much anywhere he's needed, and he gets swapped backwards and forwards between the Queensland and the New South Wales Police, purely on the basis that he's the best detective in Australia, and he can find, if anybody's going to solve the crime, it's going to be Boney. So why not bring him on the case to get him in? So he turns up at the Outback Station, as he normally does, as I'm finding there's a pattern here. He turns up unannounced, under an assumed name in a disguise, so that nobody knows who he is. And he sets about trying to solve this particular murder. Now, he says at one point that this is the most baffling case he's ever encountered, because there are very few clues about. Too many possible suspects. There seem to be a lot of people that really fit the bill about who could be the murderer. And there's no help at all from the natural environment, because these high winds that have been blowing up have been wiping out any trace of anybody walking anywhere or doing anything. Now, it's interesting to note that the murders have been occurring at the time of these particular high winds and coming up, it seems, in a few days after he gets there, according to reports, that there is going to be another storm. And so Boney, of course, sets a trap to try to figure out who it is. Now, if Boney finds the whole murder investigation in this particular novel baffling, the reader is completely perplexed, because I don't see that there's any chance that you have, when you're reading this, to be able to work out who it is that is the perpetrator or why, until you get to the right at the very end. And while I won't give away the actual final, the name of the perpetrator, I will say that the reason behind the whole thing lies in an inherited case of madness, which seems to have been instigated and blown up and starts when the high winds are there, that the electricity in the air seems to kick off this level of madness in this particular person. Mm-hmm. Well, I thought all the rest of the novels in this series, they've all had really good, crunchy reasons why somebody's going to murder them. It's either greed or envy or jealousy or lust, all those good, basic, solid emotions, David, that actually make you want to go out and just slaughter the general populace left, right and centre. But in this instance, it's like it's just a bit of madness that the person, from when they're not mad, is completely and utterly sane, and you would have absolutely no way of being able to tell who it was. So I was a bit disappointed in this one. There's a lot to like always about these Bonaparte novels by Arthur Upfield, on the basis that he writes really well about the Australian outback and the people that live there, and the Australian societies, the society as it's lived out there. Now, I know that I've had a couple of, again, every time I seem to bring up Upfield's name when I'm having a discussion with other readers, people keep on saying to me, oh, those are really racist books, aren't they? Well, no, they're not. I mean, I look at it as sort of trying to work out, and I was thinking about this earlier today, how do you work out if a novel is racist? I suppose you could say that it is if the omnipotent narrator has comments in it which which leads you to believe that, yeah, they're at heart, they're a racist person. But Upfield spent a huge amount of time living and working in the outback with both white Australians and with Indigenous Australians. And while the novels actually have racist people in them, he's really only reflecting society as it stood at that time. And to not have those particular racist people in it would lead you to believe that he wasn't doing a good job of mirroring what was going on. And so you can't push, in my view, the label of racist onto Upfield because he writes about racist people. No. They are the ones that actually make racist statements to Bonaparte and to anybody else. They are the worst people in the book. And to me, it's quite obvious he does not like them at all. As I said earlier, the smartest person going around in these books is Bonaparte himself. And he understands what's being said to him and what is going on, and he just rides above it. But you can tell that he is judging the people for what they say. I therefore don't see these books at this stage. Now, I'm reading this from a white privileged background, so I can basically say, oh yeah, it's not racist. And somebody can say, well, yes it is. That's fine. I'm saying that from my perspective, I don't see these as racist novels, but they are novels which have racist people in them, and therefore there is some language which some modern readers will find offensive, which it is offensive. But that was a reflection of the terminology that was used at the time. And so therefore you have to read it and say, right, okay, that was from the 1930s, 1920s, 1930s. Hopefully we're not doing the same things now. But you can't also censor the book purely on the basis that it's got words in it you don't like.
Yeah.
So I like these in general. As I said, this is probably the least of the novels so far because I didn't like the reasoning behind why the murders were carried out. So I gave it 3.0 out of 5. The rest of them have been 3.3, 3.5, 3.8 even for the first couple. So it's dropping away just a little bit. I'll still keep reading them because I find there's enough in here to really enjoy. But I'm a bit wary that he might be running a bit dry on the plots, David.
Indeed. Oh, that's interesting because there are some parallels with what you say with the book or the series of books that I'm going to talk about next, which is the Lord Peter Wimsey books by Dorothy Sayers. Because not so much in the books I'm about to talk about, but certainly in the last book, I think, there were certainly racist words used, but Wimsey himself clearly doesn't have that attitude. He's got a very different attitude to. There's in the previous book in the series, which was what's it called? Unnatural Death, I think, something like that. There was a Negro character in that, a black character, and but Wimsey's attitude towards that character was perfectly on an equal basis, whereas other people refer to that character as in very racist terms. So yeah, that's interesting. All right, so I will go on and talk about these couple of books, and the reason I'm talking about Dorothy Sayers. There's a couple of Dorothy Sayers books is that, as I've said before, I do volunteer for Standard eBooks and produce books for them. And each year, old books, which are, I think, 95 years old now, fall into the public domain in the United States. And this year, 2 of the Dorothy Sayers books fall into the public domain. One of them is The Unpleasantness at the Bologna Club, which Perry talked about on the podcast some while ago. And the other one is a collection of short stories called Lord Peter Wimsey. Sorry, actually, it's not that. The collection is called Lord Peter Views the Body. So anyway, so I'm just going to quickly talk about that. So yeah, the idea is that as these books fall into the public domain, we prepare in advance so that on January the 1st of the coming year, we'll release these to the public. So, So I've actually produced all of the Dorothy Sayers books for Standard eBooks, and we're up to I think this is book 4, and 4 or 5, I guess. And but I'm not sure I'm going to be still around when we get to be able to produce Busman's Honeymoon, which was say is his last book about whimsy, which won't enter the public domain until 2041.
He'll be still with us, David.
I'll be 90 years old then. So
yeah, you'll be right.
Don't know about that.
Still tottering along on your.
I'll keep going as long as I can with this because I really like these books featuring this detective Lord Peter Wimsey, who's an aristocrat and who's a bibliophile, and but he's got the nice thing about Wimsey. He's got a very nice sense of humour and turn of phrase about things. He's just a very light touch to things. Anyway, so I won't go into a lot of detail about the books themselves. Perry talked about the unpleasantness at the Bologna Club some while ago. But what I was interested in was the short story collection, Lord Peter Views the Body, because even though I'm a big Lord Peter Wimsey fan, when I came to doing this for Standard eBooks, I thought, I haven't read this before. I haven't read any of these stories before. So it was a very unexpected pleasure to be able to sort of work through the book. And I'm certain I haven't read it before because there are some things that I would definitely have remembered. One of the stories in the book features, a lot of them are to do with people leaving very odd wills behind them or stupid wills behind them. And in this particular one, it's actually about that someone's hidden a will. And in order to, and this guy's left a clue. And the clue is a crossword puzzle. He was a crossword puzzle fanatic. And he's left this huge set of clues. And they don't even have the grid in which these clues are meant to fit until they discover where the grid actually is in this house. I won't go into detail, but it's part of the house. And so they have to solve this quite complicated crossword puzzle with all these rhyming couplets as the clues. And once they've actually worked out the entire crossword puzzle, there's a set of coloured tiles or squares in the crossword puzzle which actually give them the further clues to where to find the will. So that was a lot of fun, I thought. Even if I couldn't solve the crossword puzzle myself, there is a solution at the back of the book. So that was good. So that was really interesting. And I would have remembered that if I'd read the book before, so obviously I hadn't. And there were a couple of other ones. There's the one which a bit gruesome involving the discovery of a severed head in a box. And another to do with a man who's been found dead on a beach, whose face has been terribly mutilated. And there's a reason why behind that. So these were a lot of fun. I like the sort of this. I like Lord Peter Wimsey as a creation because he's got the sharp mind and this delightful wit. And if you're able to set aside whatever reservations you might have about British aristocracy and inherited wealth, I can in this context, but that's about all. Yeah. So he's always off buying very expensive books, rare books and things like that. And he lives in this little flat in a very fine part of London, and it's all very well for them, I suppose.
Yeah, I like these as well, and I think that you can have a lot of fun with these particular things because you sort of get the impression that it's poking gentle fun.
I think so.
At the aristocracy and their and the problems that they have, and the fact that they're high-bound, and but Wimsey just seems to be to sort of float above that. And if he reminds you of anybody, it's probably Bertie Wooster, isn't he?
Yes. I think there was definitely connections. Yeah,
where Wimsey's got his is it Bunter?
Bunter, yes, Bunter
is his butler. That they were in the First World War together. Bunter was his sergeant, and he was the lieutenant. And you sort of get the impression that, not so overtly as with the Jeeves and Wooster stories of Wodehouse, but more in this instance, that you sort of get the impression that Bunter does all the hard grind behind the scenes and looks after, keeps Wimsey on the straight and narrow a lot of the time, just to make sure. But he doesn't crop up all that often. And in fact, I would have liked him to pop up a little bit more because I like his sort of gruff, solid nature, that he just gets on and does things. And without him, Wimsey wouldn't have the hope to survive, really. But they're all good fun, and they're there to be just enjoyed as good, interesting mystery novels.
Indeed.
Yeah, well, I've got a similar sort of thing coming up for my next one, and that's A Morbid Taste for Bones by Ellis Peters from 1977. Now, this is the first of the author's Chronicles of Brother Cadfael series of novels, and it actually appears on both the Crime Writers Association and Mystery Writers of America top 100 crime novel lists. So it's considered to be one of the major crime novels of the last 100 or so odd years. Now, a lot of people may have forgotten how popular these particular books were in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s. They were really, really big. I was living in London at the time in the early 90s when some of these were being produced. Not that I was reading them at that point, but my wife was, and she used to go along to some of the book signings, and she said the people just lined up down the street. They were all over the place trying to buy these particular books when they came out. Now, they were made into a television series. I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly when this was, probably sometime in the 80s, mid-late 80s, with Derek Jacobi in the role of Brother Cadfael. And they did very well. There was a full season of them, maybe 10, 12. Couldn't tell you exactly how many because I didn't really look into it. There's probably about 20 of these particular novels all up as well. Anyway, so this is the very first of Peters's, the authors, let's just say, the author's series about Brother Cadfael. And here we meet him for the first time in 1137, after he has joined a Benedictine monastery in Shrewsbury. He's become rather well known. Shrewsbury. Sorry, there you go, getting things wrong. He's become well known for his knowledge of herbs and natural medicines, and seems to have settled into his monk's life really quite nicely. He's got himself a really good spot, and he's happy where he is. His previous life, he was a crusader and sea captain, and I think he probably felt that he'd seen enough action and adventures in his time up until becoming a monk, and he'd had enough. And so he probably thought, well, better to cut my losses and go and live somewhere nice and quietly for the rest of my life, rather than have to worry about, getting knifed somewhere or meeting an ignominious death. Anyway, he's in this monastery, but the prior of his particular monastery has decided that the order needs a relic of a saint in order to attract more devotees, because if you get devotees, they leave money in the collection plate, and therefore the monastery can basically do itself up a little bit better, unless you have people coming into the monastery to worship for a particular reason. Things are a little bit quiet, especially on the financial side. Anyway, so the prior decides that there's one particular saint that he is really interested in. Unfortunately, this saint happens to be located, or the bones of this saint happen to be located in a small village in Wales. So anyway, as it is, Cadfael is about the only monk, as you could guess, he's the only monk in the whole of the monastery who can speak Welsh. So he's taken along as the interpreter, along with about 4 or 5 other monks to do the sort of heavy lifting and carry everything with the prior. So they all turn up. The prior goes to see the head man, explains what the prior wants in terms of the bones, and the head man of the area says, "Well, no." Why? Why should we do this? We haven't received any indication from the saint that she, as it is, wants to go and spend the rest of eternity stuck in some monastery in England. Why should we hand over the bones? So there's a bit of a to do, and a bit of a the prior's really sort of annoyed about this, and thought that everything would just be nice and easy. They'll be able to recover the bones, take everything back in a procession, and everything will be great from there on in. But that's not the way that things are going to be turning out. And so the local people aren't too keen on all this. But somehow or other, the prior says, well, I've got one more chance that I can get the leader of the local people to acquiesce. So he invites him along for dinner in his camp. On the way to the dinner, the leader of the local people is killed, and he's found in a forest on his own with an arrow stuck through. this obviously would lead you to believe that, the local people believe that it's the somebody, one of the monks, that's come in and done this. But all of the evidence seems to point to one of the villagers. Well, an outsider who's come in from England, who's trying to stay away from the sheriff in England, has come over to this place, and he has settled himself into the village, and works very well with the local animals around that they use, the stock. So Cadfael basically starts trying to work out what's going on. He's got a lot of ideas about, he's seen the world. He's a very intelligent man. And it's interesting to watch how he uses an almost modern approach to his forensic investigations and analysis, while staying true to what's going on in the time and place in which he's living, that is, in the 1100s. All in all, this is a pretty good little mystery. It sort of holds together very, very well. It's got the added bonus, David, of being relatively short. It's only about 200 or a bit over 200 pages, which is fairly good. And it all flows along very nicely. It's a good little pleasant, almost cosy in the sense. I mean, somebody's dead and there's got an arrow sticking out of them, but there's not a lot of blood, guts, and gore in this, and it's a pretty good mystery. Now, I suppose the question you could ask is it accurate for its period? Well, I don't know. I got no idea. I can't say whether it is or it isn't. And to be perfectly frank, I'm not going to go do huge amounts of investigation to find out. But I can tell you that it reads like it is. It doesn't sort of have a lot of problems to it. Maybe some of the dialogue might have a tinge of the late 20th century idioms.
You've got to do that. You've got to think of it as being translated.
That's right. So that's the only thing that you could possibly... They're not speaking Middle English. They're speaking sort of fairly colloquial Middle London, middle 20th century English. But she's very careful to make sure that there's not... It's all done in a sort of straight English. There's no real colloquialisms or idioms that seem out of place. These are pretty good books. Nice little... as I was telling you a while back that I'm always looking around for those comfort reads, David, that, when you get sick of things and you don't know, where do I go to from here? And you sort of think, well, I'll pick up the next one in this particular series. Well, this is another series that I think I could pick up a next one of it and go to read it and think, yep, I've enjoyed that. 2 days it takes. That's it. Because basically once you get started, all you want to do is you want to keep going. And in 2 days you'll be back reading whatever it else is that was annoying you previously. Good stuff. I gave this one 3.6 out of 5. Yeah,
that's good. Yeah, I like that whole series. I think I've probably read them all.
Okay, you've done better than I've just read the one, but we'll start working my way through. There's a lot of them.
I think they sort of tail off towards the end a bit, but they're very good all the way really through. And it's actually a very interesting period of time in England, which doesn't come up much in this particular book, but in the later ones it's much more obvious. And there's actually a civil war going on. There's a contention between King Stephen, who has taken over the throne at the time, and the Empress Maud. It all goes back to Henry II, I think, or maybe Henry I. Whatever. It's a complicated thing, and the two factions controlling England. So there's actually a civil war going on. So it's actually a very interesting period of time.
But the interesting thing about all those civil wars is that you could be stuck somewhere right over by the Welsh border or in Wales and not have the slightest idea that there was a war going on at all, because it had no impact on you whatsoever. It was all over there, in the eastern part of the country around London and all the way out through the Midlands, all the sort of wealthy parts, and down towards France and maybe spilling over into France as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that sort of stuff comes through in the later books.
So I think his history is pretty accurate. As far as I can tell. She's got a good sense of what the history was, and she's stuck to it.
Good. All right.
All right. I'll roll on to my next one, which is called The Devil and Sherlock Holmes. Now, this is actually a collection of non-fiction pieces by David Grann. Now, I raved about David Grann's book, The Wager, a few episodes ago, and that was one of the ones on the Goodreads list, if you recall.
Yep.
And David Grann was, I mention he still is, a staff writer for the New Yorker magazine, and he's obviously brilliant at writing these really engaging, thoroughly researched non-fiction bits. So The Devil in Sherlock Holmes is a collection of these shorter bits, most of them written for the New Yorker, but one was for the Atlantic and a couple for other outlets. I think the title of the book is rather deliberately sensationalist, but maybe that was the publisher's choice rather than of Grann. I could be wrong, easily. So there's actually only one story featuring Sherlock Holmes. But the Holmes story, which is the first in the collection, is a very interesting one. It's really the story of Richard Lancelyn Green, who was an obsessive Sherlock Holmes scholar. Green's father, also named Richard Lancelyn Green, had been a writer and a close friend of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. But the younger Green discovered the Sherlock Holmes stories before he turned 11 and was quickly obsessed, and going on to become a prominent member of Sherlockian societies or fan clubs, whatever you like to call them. And he wrote a number of quite serious papers about the character. And in his mature years, he was intent on writing a definitive biography of Holmes's creator, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and was trying to track down an archive of letters, diary entries and manuscripts apparently in the possession of one of Doyle's surviving children. Now, though she had promised to donate the archive to the British Library, after her death, this archive of material turned up instead for auction. So I won't describe all the ins and outs of Green's quest to get hold of this archive, but it makes very interesting reading. Suffice it to say that in this obsessive quest, Green made a lot of enemies, and one day was found dead in his home, apparently after being garroted. No one was ever identified as the murderer. So we have this classic Holmesian mystery about this most obsessive of Holmes fans. Very interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff. And there is a sort of suggestion at the end as to actually who done it. So it's good. So that's how the book starts off. And so there are 12 stories in total in the collection. And each one of them is individual, interesting and very well written. It's clear that David Grann spares no effort in researching his articles and books. He goes far underground beneath New York to write about the vast construction project to provide the city with drinking water. He voyages in a leaky boat through treacherous water to research a story about one man's obsessive quest to stay the giant squid and perhaps capture and raise some of its young. He goes into a federal prison to talk to an old man who has made a lifelong career of robbing banks and escaping from imprisonment. He goes back into prison again to study a violent gang within the prison itself. He goes to Haiti to attend the trial in absentia of Toto Constant, a man called the Devil by those who suffered from his violent extremism. And somehow David Grann manages to track down people and interview them who you think would be very hard to actually work out who they were and how to get hold of them. But he interviews a number of these people involved in these stories with great panache. So look, all of these stories are well worth reading, and they all just convince me to keep on tracking down the other books written by the author. Indeed, I'm waiting my turn at the local library to get hold of a couple of others of his, which I've already put on reserve. So great stuff. Looking forward to seeing those.
Yeah, they are. He's a very good writer. I look at him as being sort of in that same sort of range as, people like Simon Winchester and Michael Lewis.
Yeah.
And who basically get heavily into their research, but have got a way of being able to dump the information on you so that you don't really feel as though it's a lecture. It's actually a story that they're trying to tell, and there's a big story to tell that you may never have come across or know anything about. And it's all fascinating stuff. And they are, but the major thing is that all of those three writers are just good writers, and the work that they produce is interesting. It's nothing less than interesting. And for non-fiction, they're able to put a lot of information across in a very, very pleasing way. And yes, I think David Grann is one of those people that I came across him, with the Lost City of Z or Z.
Whatever, yeah.
Well, it depends. The Americans would pronounce it Z, but you're writing about an English explorer, so that would be Z. What the hell? Though whatever, it's Lost City of Z. Good stuff. And
good stuff.
Yeah, if you can track that one down, you'll enjoy that one.
Yeah, I will. Yeah,
because it's all about trying to find something in the middle.
And
of
you should try and get hold of the Wager too.
I will actually. Now that you've reminded me about him, I shall actually, because I'd forgotten about him a bit and hadn't come across him very much. And so the other one I like is Greg Dyer, who wrote Zona. The story of the story of a film about a story about the book about the film about a story of a government room, whatever that was about the and also he wrote a piece about Where Eagles Dare called Broadsword Calling Danny Boy, and that was not as good as the one about the Russian film, but it was still pretty good anyway. And he's written a number of other things that I'm slowly trying to get into. But again, I've got so many books on the to-be-read list, David, that it's just trying to just work your way through the piles to be able to get through. And so what do? I go to the library instead and pick up another book that I really shouldn't. And one of those is one that I found, the next one I'm going to be talking about. And this is a book by an author called Susan Hill. And the book is called Black Sheep from 2013. This is a quite short novel, almost novella length. It's only about 150 pages. Now, I knew of Susan Hill, but I hadn't, to my recollection, read anything by her, although she has been writing since the very early 1960s. Now, she's best known for her Gothic novels, such as The Woman in Black, a book that has been filmed twice and which has also been adapted for the stage. And the current production of that adaptation is now the second longest running play in the history of the West End in London, after Agatha Christie's The Mousetrap. So this thing's been running since about 1988. It's really been running a heck of a long time. I'd heard of it, hadn't seen it, but anyway, I think that her writing is such that I really should try and track these down. Now, Susan Hill won the Whitbread Novel Award in 1972 for The Bird of Night, which was also shortlisted for the Booker Prize in that particular year. So she's been around for a fair while and is very well respected. But she's just one of those ones that sort of doesn't sort of get a lot of attention very much, which is a bit odd. But anyway, and if this novel is a short novel that I'm reading here is anything to go by, I should check out a lot more of her stuff. Now, this novel is set somewhere in the coal mining town, fictional coal mining town of Mount of Zeal, and this novel tells the story of the Hawker family. That's Howker, not Hawker. They consist of a mother, father, 4 sons, and a daughter. Now, this particular town is a purely and simply coal mining town. So the father and the oldest 3 sons work down the pit, and it is assumed that the youngest, Ted, will also follow in their footsteps. But he wants something else. He doesn't want to be going down the pit at all, and he finds work on a local sheep farm. He's not getting paid much for it, only basically his room and his board, but he loves it, and he really loves working with the animals out there, and he has no intention of ever going down the pit if he can avoid it. Now, Rose, the daughter, marries the vile son of the pit manager and starts working in a shop in town. Now, but all is not exactly well right from the very beginning of this particular book for any of them, and it slowly but steadily, and then very rapidly near the end, gets worse and worse. There's an accident, as you can imagine, down the pit. A few people lose their lives. Rose gets belted by her husband and leaves him and comes back home again. And poor old Ted, in the end, has to go working down the pit to make some money for the family. But it ends really, really tragically, very quickly and very tragically. Now, I won't go into any more detail than that, but the title of this particular book may refer to either Ted alone, as he's the black sheep of the family because he doesn't want to go down the pit with everybody else, or it might actually refer to the family as a whole, who really basically just follow the traditional roles like sheep and are just covered in coal dust. Am I stretching things a bit far there, David?
Yeah, I can see that.
Maybe not. Anyway, you can read it as both, but let's just say that the black sheep of this particular novel is Ted, who tries to come back and do the right thing, and then it all just goes to hell in a handbasket. Now, there's a lot going on here in a very short novel, in about 140 pages, and some very important scenes are just told in crisp, precise sentences that don't linger on the emotional side of things very much with this. So the author's leading it up to the reader to form their own opinions about what's going on. So it's very intriguing, very disturbing. And I really felt that I had to go out and try and find something to read a lot lighter after this.
Yeah,
and I think it was straight after this that I read the Cadfael novel and felt a heck of a lot better. Because this one's... bit
of a downer.
Pretty... Well, it is. But you look at it and go, how the hell did you get all of that into this such short, tiny little novel and then just move on? So anyway, I gave it 3.8 out of 5. And it will be... It's a book that has piqued my interest about this particular author, and I'll try and track down some more of her work. And a lot of the time, I think that's what short novels are there for. Short novels are novellas. You can read a short piece by a particular author and think, well, this is pretty good, and then use that as a means to sort of say, well, I've discovered somebody new, and go on and read their longer stuff. Now, their longer stuff may not work, but then again, it might, and so you may be able to find something. So if you're a bit worried about finding a new author and not terribly sure how to get started because, you know, that 1,000-page novel is just a little bit daunting, try and find something a little bit shorter that they may have written, and work your way through that, and then see whether that gives you an idea of their style. It's very much the way that people work in the science fiction genre, in the sense that a lot of the authors start off writing shorter fiction and then graduate to novels later on, whereas in the sort of general literary mainstream world, for want of a better term, say non-genre, they just jump straight into these bloody big novels. And here's my first novel of 800 pages, and you go, are you bloody kidding me? How am I going to invest that amount of time and that amount of effort in a novel or a novelist I know nothing about, and a lot of money, and then may come at the end thinking, I've just wasted 3 weeks or a month of my life. And so find something smaller, start off, and then work your way through.
Okay,
that's my opinion for the day, David.
Right.
I'll move on now. I won't give you any more.
All right, fine.
Or maybe I will.
All right. Well, we're certainly changing mood. Definitely.
You're jumping around a bit, but that's okay. Well, that's the way we read, though, David, isn't it?
Well, that's right.
That's the way we read. We don't stay in one thing. We don't stay in one lane. We move from one lane to another all over the place.
We do. Okay. Well, I'm moving on to something which is lighter, because this is a book for children, sort of the middle school level. And if you've listened beyond the podcast, you know that I actually quite like reading books of this sort of age group, aimed at this sort of age group. But I have to say that I was disappointed by this one. The book is called Impossible Creatures by Katherine Rundell. Now, I'm disappointed because I really liked some of Rundell's other books for the same audience, particularly Rooftoppers, which I thought was terrific. And other excellent books by her are The Girl Savage and The Explorer. Brilliant. So The Explorer, there's a whole bunch of kids who, on a little plane which crashes in the Amazon, and they survive weeks and weeks and weeks in the Amazon by themselves, with a little bit of help. But they're good books. And I should also say that Katherine Rundell is also an academic, and she recently published a scholarly book on the Elizabethan era poet John Donne. Haven't read that one, though. Anyway, Impossible Creatures is her first real fantasy novel. The other children's books which I've read by her, while they deal with unlikely occurrences like planes crashing at the Amazon, are basically realist in their plots and their subject matter. So I have to think that in this book, Rundell just hasn't quite got her head right yet when it comes to writing fantasy. She seems to me to have gone over the top in inventing fantastic beasts, places, and plot devices. And I'm hoping that if she does keep writing this kind of fiction, that she'll settle down a bit. So, having said all that, there are some things to like in Impossible Creatures, and I like the way it starts. We're introduced to two young people, Christopher Forrester, who's a boy in his early teens living in England, modern-day, everyday England, and a girl called Mal Arvorian, who is from somewhere different. It's, of course, inevitable that Christopher ends up meeting Mal and travelling to the somewhere different, which turns out to be a set of magical islands in mid-Atlantic, hidden from the rest of the modern world, and where magical power and fantastic creatures still survive, though something there has started to go badly wrong. So far, so good. Now, I did like the way it starts is very, very clever, I thought. We have 2 very short chapters. And Christopher's one starts, "It was a fine day until something tried to eat him." And Mel's chapter begins, "It was a fine day until somebody tried to kill her." And we go on from there. So the start is good. The problem for me developed further in the book when we're in this fantastical island place, and she keeps to keep throwing different species of fantastic animal, one after the other at us. No, she hasn't invented them all. A lot of them are sort of real creatures out of legends of different countries. So there are familiar ones like unicorns and dragons, and a lot of very unfamiliar ones. But it seems like every time the characters turn a corner, they're tripping over yet another strange creature that has to be explained. And I just thought it was excessive and unnecessary to my mind. And then there's the quest, which Mel and Christopher have to go on. And this started to feel to me like one of those old text adventures like Zork. In order to reach the ultimate goal, they have to get this particular magical item. To get that item, they have to go to this particular place. To get there, they have to get this particular thing. In order to get that, they have to talk to this particular person, and so on and so on and so on. Just a long chain of seemingly arbitrary hoops that they have to jump through to get to the ultimate end. So I found the middle of the book quite tedious and annoying. It does end on a stronger, though very sad note, and though I believe it's meant to be the start of a trilogy, it's not one of those books like The Will of the Many I talked about recently, which makes very little sense at the end without you feeling that you need to read the follow-ups. You can read this as a standalone book. It works perfectly well if you stop with this one, which I think I probably will do. So there we are.
As you were going along, and I was thinking that it sounded like a Dungeons and Dragons adventure, where every time you go around a corner, there's another monster that you have to slay to be able to get down the corridor to the next.
A bit like that. I'm probably being too critical, chamber. But that's how it struck me.
All right. No, fair enough. I'm back to another crime novel. Excuse me. This time, Devil in a Blue Dress, from 1990 by Walter Mosley. This is the first of the author's Easy Rawlins series of novels, and it also appears on the Guardian list of 1,000 best novels that you should read, and the Mystery Writers of America top 100 crime novels list.
Oh.
Seem to keep on coming across these. There's a very good reason, because I'm sort of using them as a means of reminding myself that these are the ones that I should actually go and read. Now, this is Walter Mosley's debut novel, and it's certainly a landmark publication in the annals of crime fiction. It's told in the tradition of Chandler and MacDonald and Hammett, but from the African-American point of view, very rare, but becoming more prevalent. And I would think that there were a lot of people like the author S.A. Cosby that I've been going on and on about on this particular podcast over the last year or two, who would not really have felt that it was possible for them to be able to write in this particular genre unless Walter Mosley had come in and ploughed the field originally, so to speak. So anyway, let's have a look at what the novel's about. So it's 1948, Los Angeles. Easy Rawlins has just lost his job in an aircraft factory. He's come back from the war, got a job in the aircraft factory, probably mouthed off a bit, or was asked to stay behind and do some work for no pay, and he said no, he was busy. So the guy said, well, in that case, don't bother coming back at all, and so he's lost his job. So he's sitting in a bar having a beer. Now, Rawlins is living in Los Angeles after having moved there from Houston in Texas, and the bar owner that the owner of the bar that he's drinking in is also an old friend of his from Houston. And in fact, he keeps on running across a lot of people from Houston in LA. And I kept on thinking all the time, well, this is a bit ridiculous, really. Why is this happening? But I guess really when you come down to it, you have to you remember what, after the Second World War, Texas was probably like for an African American, and what California was like. Some of these guys that had been fighting in the army from Texas had come across people from California, other African Americans from California, because they, as you recall, they segregated the army and they kept all the African American soldiers all together. talking to people from California, they probably realised that it was a hell of a lot better place for them than Texas, where they were liable to be harassed and beaten up by just about everybody. Well, as it is, things aren't paradise in California, as Rawlins finds out. He's been there long enough now to have bought himself a house, although he doesn't have a wife or a steady girlfriend. And he's lost his job, and therefore he can't pay his mortgage. So when the bar owner says to him, I've got a prospect for a job for you. There's a guy that I know who's got a bit of a problem and wants some help with it. So he gets introduced to the guy with the problem, and the guy is a white lawyer, and this white lawyer wants Easy to find Miss Daphne Monet, who's a pneumatic blonde with a bit of a reputation and a habit of hanging around African-American music joints. White women were allowed in, but white men were not. And so the white lawyer can't find anybody of his race, a white guy, to go and try and track this woman down, because all he knows is that she hangs around in these music joints, and he needs somebody, like an African-American, like Easy Rawlins, to be able to find things. Easy's dubious about this, as you can possibly understand, because he doesn't want to get anybody in trouble, and he doesn't know how to go about doing it anyway, because that's not what he does. He's just a factory worker. But he needs the money, and there's really good money on offer, enough to make him sort of think that he really has to go through with this. So he takes it under a sense of reluctance and slowly starts piecing together the woman's relationships and getting further involved in the case, until he seems to find himself in way too far, because everybody he seems to come across seems to be connected, as they always are in a lot of these plots. This is really an excellent piece of work, and the only real criticism I could find is that all the players seem to be connected in some way or other. But thinking about it again, as I said, they may have all basically shifted purely to get away from the political and racial situation in Texas. Mm. But even if that is the only criticism I've got, it's really a minor consideration in regards to this. It's a seminal work in modern American crime fiction, 1990. So it's 30 years old, but even so, it feels like it was just written yesterday, even though they're talking about something that's happening in 1948. There are another 14 in this particular series, David, and I look forward to reading them all. I think they're going to be really quite good. But it's interesting that, by the way, I gave this one 4.4 out of 5, so it's very high up for me for a crime novel. Interesting to note, though, with this, and this, you wonder whether this is a publisher's thing or not. The first novel in the series is Devil in a Blue Dress. Second one, A Red Death. Then White Butterfly, Black Betty, A Little Yellow Dog,
okay,
until he gets to 1997, where the novel is Gone Fishing. And you sort of think that Mosley was sort of pushed into the idea of having a colour. And I would think that Devil in a Blue Dress was probably just a throwaway title, or a title that he wanted, because this woman, Daphne Monet, is known for wearing, sort of tight blue dresses around. But I would think that the publishers decided to get him onto the colour arrangement until he got to 97, and then he basically said, nah, done with it. But he comes back to it again later on with things like Little Grann, Rose Gold, Blood Grove, and a few other titles later on. But anyway, they are very, very good and interesting novels. And he's very well regarded in the crime and mystery scene in the US, as he should be everywhere. Indeed.
That sounds interesting. All right, so I'm going to roll into our last book of the day, and my last book of the day. And this is probably the best book I've read in the last couple of months. Well, certainly since our last episode. And it's a book called Loot, L-O-O-T, Loot, by Tania James. And I spotted this book on the long list for the 2023 US National Book Awards, and it looked intriguing, so I put it on hold at the library and picked it up. And it's a piece of historical fiction, and it's about historical events in India, which I knew nothing about. Mind you, I don't know very much about the history of India, I have to admit. And so, although there are admittedly some violent and distressing incidents in the book, overall, the story has a warm, engaging feel as the life journey of the main character draws you in. So we start in the city of Srirangapatna. I hope I've gotten it right, and all of our Indian listeners can tell me if I got it wrong, which is part of the kingdom of Mysore in India in the year 1794, when it was under the rule of Tipu Sultan Fath Ali Khan, who was at that time loosely allied to France. Now, the protagonist of the story is a young boy called Abbas, who works as a woodcarver for his father, Yusuf Muhammad. As well as his rather boring everyday work, Abbas also loves to make little wooden toys, some of which come to the attention of the wife of Tipu Sultan, and Abbas begins to make some of his toys, especially at her request. And so in this way, he comes to the notice of Tipu Sultan himself. So one day, Tipu Sultan orders Abbas to come to him. It's only like 10 or 11 or something at the time. And he's terrified, particularly after he discovers that Tipu's wife has betrayed Tipu Sultan. And so she's been thrown in jail or done something evil. Someone's done something to her. So he thinks that he's in big trouble. But the king doesn't want to have Abbas killed, but rather to work as an assistant to a French inventor, Lucien Deleuze. Deleuze has been living in Mysore for some time after fleeing his home in Rouen in France after the French Revolution, and he's found a patron in Tipu Sultan. Now, the king wants Deleuze to build a life-size automaton of a tiger attacking a British soldier. It's apparently he's seen some little model which he has attracted his interest, and he wants a life-size version of this thing, and which will move and growl and make noises. So one doesn't say no to an absolute ruler like Tipu Sultan, particularly if you're so lowly a person as Abbas. So he starts working with Deleuze to build this contraption, learning a great deal as he does, but he's always aware of how much there is left for him to learn. But in the background of all this is a bit of history which I didn't know. In the background of all this is the war with the British. Well, the British in the form of the East India Company mainly, which eventually leads to the siege of Srirangapatna. Tipu Sultan dies in the attack, and young Abbas only barely survives himself. He has to go into hiding. So Deleuze also escapes the violence and offers to take, when they meet up again, offers to take Abbas back home with him to Rouen and teach him the trade of clockmaking. But Abbas needs to stay and tend his dying father, reluctantly refuses. But Abbas is a very talented and ambitious young man, and he yearns to shake the world with his ability. But his situation in life is such that this seems impossible without the aid of a teacher and mentor like Lucien Deleuze. So in the aftermath of the siege, the victorious British divide up the spoils. And among these is the mechanical tiger automaton, which is rewarded as a prize to a Colonel Selwyn, who takes it back home to England as a gift to his wife. So things happen. I won't go into all the humorous detail, but Abbas stows away aboard a British merchant ship after his father's died. He stows away aboard a British merchant ship on which he's forced to serve for several years before finally reaching Rouen, only to find that when he gets there that Lucien Deleuze has just recently died a few months ago, leaving a shop to his adopted daughter, Jehan, who's the mixed-race child of a friend of his in India. Now, she's struggling to make ends meet with the shop now that Deleuze is no longer there. And Abbas doesn't have sufficient skills to continue the clockmaking business that was there before. So between the two of these young people, they come up with an audacious plan to get back the mechanical tiger from Colonel Selwyn's widow. So how this plan works out occupies the remainder of the book, but it also introduces us to two more very interesting characters in Lady Selwyn, the widow of Captain Selwyn, Colonel Selwyn, and her man of business, Rum, R-U-M, who's another expatriate Indian like Abbas from the same sort of region of India. And the point of view in the book shifts smoothly as it's needed, from Abbas to a midshipman who serves with Abbas aboard the merchantman, to Jehan, to Lady Selwyn, to Rum. All of this makes a harmonious whole rather than a disjointed narrative. Look, I really enjoyed this book. It's very educational. It's based on true historical events. Even the tiger, the mechanical tiger, was a real thing. And it's also highly entertaining, at times very moving. There's a tender, slowly developing love story. It has quite a lot of things to say about how non-white people like Abbas and Room were treated by white society at the time, and of course, even still today. I really loved it. I thought it was great. Highly recommend it.
Okay, sounds really good.
It was good. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was on the award list, but didn't win?
It didn't win, but it was on the award list for the National Book Award for the US.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, well, I think we're done for the day.
We're done, yes.
I think we are done for the day. So, as is usual at this particular time of year, David, we take a bit of a break over the festive season, whatever your holiday may be, the Christmas, New Year, or end of year celebrations. We'll be back in mid-ish January.
Mid-January, we haven't actually decided on a date.
We haven't decided a date. About 6
we'll
weeks.
let you know.
We'll let you know about 6 weeks with our best of the year for 2023.
And if you've been paying attention, you will realise that the next episode is our 100th episode, Perry. 100 episodes.
100th. But we also have to announce that it's going to be our last.
Indeed.
We've been doing this podcast now for nigh on 5 years.
Yep.
Hit 100 episodes. And I, for one, feel as though I think I'm starting to repeat myself, David, a bit too much. And I think that's probably time for us to move on to other things. And so we decided that, given that it was number 100 for the end of the year, a bit fortuitous and maybe a tad contrived that we dropped one episode earlier on when we didn't have much time to get stuff together. But we've just decided that it's probably best if we move on and do other things. It might well be that we come back from time to time.
For some special episodes, yeah.
Yes, it might well be that we do that. There's a couple of things that might be of interest that we might put up. I know that you and I, David, are going to be giving a talk together at the Melbourne's Nova Mob in February or March. March, regarding the best Hugo novels of the 1960s. So we shall have to work out what we're going to be doing with that one, and we'll probably record that, and never know, it might pop up in your subscriptions list. But anyway, David, that'll be it. So we'll be finishing up. Should have a glass of champagne on the podcast to finish things off. It's been a long and interesting journey. No, never thought we'd do 5 years.
Goodness no. I think we didn't really expect to get to 1 year, let alone...
No, not really, and it just sort of kept on going. And odd that you think now that all the hard slog we had to go through, or you had to go through, especially on the technical side of things in the early days, and now you've developed a whole lot of tools to make it a heck of a lot easier. So, but we should be able to use those tools for other things further on down the track. But it's been good. And it's been enjoyable up until now. But some of the enjoyment from our end, I think, is starting to wane a little bit, and starting to get a bit of a chore. So it's probably best that we give it up while we're still able. And our one and only listener rings us up and says, "Don't bother anymore. I've turned you off." When that happens, then we know we're in trouble. But
that hasn't happened yet.
It hasn't happened just yet. Anyway, David, so we shall. I'll see you in about 6 weeks.
Yep.
With our final episode, and we shall thank the listener for being with us all this way.
Sticking with us.
All right. We'll talk to you then.
See you then. See you next week. Next time.